Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. As you may or may not have noticed, at the beginning of September last year, I stepped away from the monthly reading wrap-ups. This is because I do not want to pressure myself into quantity when it comes to reading books. Whenever the number of books or pages I've read justify a video, I'll make one, no matter how many days that takes. Hence this series, X Days of Reading. This is episode 3, 43 days of reading. On this graph you can see the books I've read starting in September of last year. My first episode, 72 days of reading, I read 8 books and 1 short story. Page count was 3,247. During episode 2, 46 days of reading, I read 7 books with a total of 3,430 pages. This episode covers 43 days of reading from December 27 until February 8. I read 8 books with a total of 3,633 pages. Let's dive into the books in the chronological order in which I finished reading them, starting with The Wee Free Man by Terry Pratchett. Back in March 2023, I read my first book in the immense popular Discworld series by this British author, Guards. This 8th book in the series was recommended by several booktubers as a good starting point for the total of 41 books. For several reasons, which I won't go into here, it was a mediocre experience for me. Still, somehow, without really knowing why, I picked up one of the YA books in the series, the first installment of the sub-series called The Tiffany Aching Sequence. The Wee Free Man was an absolute delight. It took me only 4 days. The writing is of such high standard, with so much inventive use of the English, like when Tiffany's dress is being described. It has been owned by many sisters before her, and has been taken up, taken out, taken down, and taken in by her mother so many times that it really ought to have been taken away. Or they went to sleep under the stars, which the maths teachers would count, the astronomy teachers would measure, and the literature teachers would name. And it is so funny, mainly thanks to the McCaffrey, the little blue man who talks some sort of Scottish and believe that this life they live is a dream from which they will wake up when they die. So in this life they hardly care about anything and spend their time mainly stealing, fighting and drinking. It's no surprise that one of the main characters of the McCaffrey is called Rob Anybody. And another one, Daft Woolley, is extremely funny because almost every time he speaks, he reveals a secret or something painful or awkward. I was literally laughing out loud several times. When they're in some sort of a dream, they find a treasure with jewels and gold coins. Tiffany explains to Rob Anybody that this dream treasure will probably turn into rubbish in the morning. "Aye," said Rob Anybody. He glanced at the horizon. "Okay, you heard her, lads. We got maybe half an hour to sell it to someone. Permission to go off ski?" he added to Tiffany. It's not just hilariously funny, but at times poetically beautiful and philosophical. Granny Aching, the grandmother of Tiffany, had made silence into a form of art. She didn't know how to talk to me, and I was too scared to talk to her. And so we never talked, and we turned silence into something to share. And Granny's silence was warm and brought you inside. In her silence you were welcome and belonged. All you had to bring was a silence of your own. Reading this book, there was a big smile on my face all the time, especially on the pages with the Wee Free Men on it. I gave this book 78 points out of 100, which compares to 4 stars. On January 7th, I finished reading The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. I started reading this book on December 27, so I spent 11 days with it. This is one of the classics that I want to read to get some idea of the earlier fantasy. It was first published in 1968, and it's a darling for many people who read this book when they were younger. I had high expectations going into this read, but I'm afraid the book didn't exactly live up to that. The foreword by Patrick Rothfuss really sets the stage for an absolutely unforgettable time. To me, a lot of the book, especially the first half or so, was mainly confusing and rather directionless. It's very surrealistic, allegorical and abstract. The very condensed writing style with strange and inimitable metaphors didn't really help. A grey morning, rain was beginning to fall, and she, the unicorn, shone through it like a dolphin. He's an old man, stingy as late November. His face suddenly seemed as pale and weary as a used lemon drop. It really took some effort on my part to invest in this fairy tale. The second half agreed a bit more with me. The story got going, but the end to me wasn't very surprising or rewarding. I also kept on guessing about the true core of this story. Is it about aging and mortality, or is it about truth and reality versus dreaming? Or perhaps it is about beauty. There are also beautiful language and tender moments in the story. However, they didn't win me over. Good to have read such a classic, but on to more impactful stories. I gave The Last Unicorn 64 points out of 100. And just to make sure, this is my personal opinion and I hope I'm not offending anybody. Almost right after finishing The We Free Men, I read the second book in the Tiffany Aching sequence. A Hatful of Sky by Terry Pratchett. I spent 12 days reading this one and finished it on January 19. It took a little more effort, but it's a very special book. The first half is very funny, the second half is funny too, but it's more intriguing, touching, surrealistic and beautiful. It presents me with more food for thought than the first book in this series, but it made me laugh just a little less. But when I did laugh, it was usually out loud. Jeanie, the Calda of the Knack McFeagle, folds her arms. When a female Feagle does that, there's no hope left. When somebody loses consciousness, Rob Anybody says that in those instances you have to put someone's head between their legs. Daft Woolly sighed and drew his sword. "Sounds a wee bit drastic to me," he said, "but if someone will help me hold her steady." Especially toward the end, the story gets more meaningful and interesting. I gave A Hatful of Sky 71 points out of 100. On January 22nd, I finished reading Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb, the final book in the Farseer trilogy. In my reading experience on the whole trilogy, I go into more depth, but for now I can say that I absolutely love this book. For me, it's the best of the three, mainly because of the second half. The magic of the Elderlings is so magnificent, it really blew me away. Even though I spent 22 days with this novel, every reading session went by in a blink. Every page was a joy of prose. Robin Hobb is such a skilled writer. The book does not end with any big, revealing moment. The story gradually progresses in the appointed direction, and once there, things can be wrapped up. Not that it's not impressive or overwhelming, it's just not very surprising. I gave this book 94 points out of 100. The next two books I finished reading are both non-fiction, and one of them is a Dutch book, but I'll show them anyway. Back in August 2021, I read Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. This is her story of almost dying from cancer, having a near-death experience, coming back to life, and making a remarkable recovery. I plan on making a separate video on this truly amazing story on the side. On January 23, I finished reading her second book, titled What If This Is Heaven? I spent 7 days with it, and although I had mixed feelings about this book, it is still very good. The author tells about the time after her NDE, near-death experience, and miraculous recovery. Her reintegration into life and applying her biggest lesson, to love yourself, is not always easy. From the moment her first book was published, a new life started for her in which she travels the globe to give talks and meet people. At the end of meetings with people, she explains why some of our firm beliefs truly are myths, like you get what you deserve, or spiritual peoples don't have egos, or we must always be positive. Not everything in this second book appealed to me, like the very elaborate way of explaining things and being annoyingly repetitive at times. Also, the tips and exercises at the end of each chapter are lost to me. But this is easily forgotten when her message gets through to me. This book scored 79 out of 100. The next book I finished is the biography of Etty Hillesum, written by Judith Koelemeijer. It's written in Dutch and it's very well written. Etty Hillesum was a Jewish woman born in 1914 and killed by the Nazis in 1943. Etty aspired to be a writer but wasn't able to find any suitable form to do it. So upon recommendation of a very important friend, she started writing a diary on March 9, 1941. In this diary, she writes about her inner conflicts and development, while on the background, life for Jews became increasingly difficult and dangerous. Her story is very different from many other Holocaust books in that she is not trying to escape the fate of her people and go into hiding, for instance, or putting all her energy into helping the resistance. Instead, she embraces her fate and is able to find peace in her inner core. She adamantly refuses to go into hiding, even though many people around her offered several opportunities to do so. A selection of her diary was first published in 1981, almost 40 years after her death. There is also a wonderful edition of her collected works. There is very much to say about this remarkable woman, who also was a very gifted writer. But I'll leave it at this for now. Perhaps I'll make a separate video in my series on the site one day. This biography deserves all my praise. It took me some time to read it, 35 days. But if I hadn't been sidetracked by all the fantasy I was reading in between, I could have read this book in just a few days. I gave Etty Hillesum, Het verhaal van haar leven, The Story of Her Life, by Judith Koelemeijer, 95 points out of 100. My return to the Wheel of Time was absolutely great. The last book in the series I read, Knife of Dreams, I finished on November 11, and I started reading this one, The Gathering Storm, on January 23. So that's a break of about 2.5 months from the series. But I'm definitely back on track. Upon recording this video, I'm about 20% into Towers of Midnight. The Gathering Storm kept me occupied for 15 days, and it gave me everything I hoped it would. Already on the second page of this book, I felt the difference in writing style. It is of course impossible to determine which words are from Jordan and which were written by Brandon Sanderson. But overall, I immediately felt that the prose was easier accessible and more pleasant to read. The first 200 pages or so of the book is mainly setting the scene and preparing the reader for what's to come. Because there's a lot happening in this book, especially compared to books as The Path of Daggers and Crossroads of Twilight. In this 12th book in the series, the story enthralls again. I had to wait more than 300 pages for one of my favorite characters, Matt, to make his appearance. And Elaine doesn't show up at all. But that's okay. I love how Rand's character development is done, and I literally had to recover after reading some of the gripping and breathtaking chapters in which he is put to the test. There are less moments of prosaic brilliance, which Robert Jordan patented. For instance, the fish metaphors Schwann uses are somewhat weaker. This doesn't mean that there is nothing to enjoy in this prose. On the contrary, here is a true Jordanesque sentence. This woman's smile made you want to count the knives on your belt and in your boot, just to make sure none of them had found their way into your back while you were distracted. This book is action-packed and very much is happening. Threads that seemingly kept on being woven in previous books finally come together. I gave The Gathering Storm 95 points out of 100. We're back in the really high scores. My final read in these 43 days is the first book in the legendary series The Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey, Dragonflight. It was first published in 1969, but I hardly had the feeling that this book, the prose, or the story were outdated. It felt very fresh and new to me. The story is about Pern, a world that is being threatened by threads. What these are is told at the end. They originate from a red planet that every 400 years or so passes very close to Pern. This red planet is on its way to Pern again and can already be seen in the sky. This is the story about the last dragon riders and how they manage to fulfill their task of saving Pern from destruction. There is politics and a lot of world building and dragon lore. I enjoyed this book quite a bit, but it wasn't love at first sight. The prose is condensed and lots of information is thrown at the reader in artfully composed sentences. Yet it took me very long to find my bearing in this story. McCaffrey does not give the reader a map or a dictionary to navigate by. All is revealed eventually, but it takes a lot of time. Too long for my taste. It's only at page 112 that I write in the margin, "Yes, I'm sold. This is fun and interesting." But then in part 2 the vagueness sets in again. It felt as if the author intentionally blurs the picture she's trying to convey to the reader. Also, at times, McCaffrey uses words that, to my non-native ears, sound a bit scholarly and prudish. Words like ablutions, pernicious, portentously, ignominy. Nothing major, of course. Overall, I enjoyed my time with this book. Especially the second half is exciting and very well written. I gave Dragonflight 88 points out of 100. Here you see the complete graph that shows all my reads starting at the 1st of September of 2023 up until February 8 of this year. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.